Hello, in this short video, we're going to discuss the structures of the midbrain. So just to orient ourselves, just to remind ourselves where we were with the hindbrain, we had our medulla, we had our pons, and we had the cerebellum, and then we had that raphe and reticular formation running up through those areas to arouse the cerebral cortex. Now where we are here, atop the hindbrain sits the midbrain, and it's this little area that's highlighted in kind of a bluish color. And then we see this line, and so this line is just showing us what the cross-section is that's represented here. And so there are kind of four main parts to the midbrain. We have the tectum, the colliculi, the tegmentum, and the substantia nigra. So tectum actually stands for the word roof. And so it makes up kind of the rear portion of the midbrain, and it's formed by the two swellings that make up the superior and inferior colliculi. We'll talk more about those in the next slide. And then we have the tegmentum and the substantia nigra. And so this is just kind of showing you, here's the tectum, showing you the inferior colliculi, showing you the tegmentum, which has part of the reticular formation, and then we have the substantia nigra here. And so the substantia nigra, which I'll wait and discuss that on the next slide. So again, the tectum is the roof of the midbrain, and it's going to be made up of those four bulbar colliculi that I'll show you in a 3D rendition in a moment. Then we have our superior and inferior colliculus. So plural would be colliculi. So the superior colliculus is important in processing visual information. So the idea is that incoming visual information is sent to the superior colliculus to associate it with a movement. And so basically it helps you kind of orient to objects of interest in your visual field. So it might be you see something out in your periphery and your superior colliculus decides if it's something important enough to turn and orient your head to. At least that's the way I understand the superior colliculus. The inferior colliculus, on the other hand, is important in processing auditory information, recognizing different frequencies and pitches and things like that. So inferior colliculi important in processing auditory information, superior visual information. So again, they're processing the sensory information. And they're really a good landmark in the brain, and I'll show you again in a moment a 3D rendition of them, because they are these four kind of little balls that stick out in that portion of the midbrain. Then we have the tegmentum, and the tegmentum contains nuclei for cranial nerves. It's part of the reticular formation. It has the red nucleus, which is an area that we'll come back and talk about later in the semester. And so that's all contained within the tegmentum. And then we have this area called the substantia nigra. And so that is here in this cross section. So this would be the center of the brain. And so we have a substantia nigra on each side. And you see how it's here, it's kind of a darker color. And that's because this term, substantia nigra, means substance black. And so those cells have kind of a blackish appearance within the brain. And the importance of these cells is that they contain dopamine neurons. And so these dopamine-containing neurons project to another area called the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia facilitates readiness for movement. And so people who have Parkinson's disease have actually lost 60 to 70% of the cells in the substantia nigra before they have an onset of symptoms. So the first symptom for Parkinson's disease is typically a unilateral tremor. And again, people with Parkinson's disease have lost 60 to 70% of those dopamine-containing neurons in the substantia nigra before they even have an onset of symptoms. That means that the basal ganglia, which normally receive this dopamine input, has a loss of dopamine input and thus has an inability to initiate movement. That's something else we'll come back and talk about more in the movement chapter. So here I just wanted to show you this is that 3D model that I had put on a previous slide. And if you look up here, it's at brainfacts.org, and it's really kind of a cool little place. You can kind of play around with it. You can go up here and change the different areas of the brain, and most of them come up with some sort of little explanation for what it does. And so I wanted to show you here. I wanted to start off with kind of looks like the cross section we were at. We were at more. This is, I believe the bottom of the or the most ventral portion of the midbrain. And so what I wanted to show you, I was wrong, it was the most anterior portion. So if we turn it around, trying to turn around to show you those little colliculi. So here's oriented, this would be the roof, right? detect them. And if I turn it around, you can see here are those colliculi. Remember I said they were kind of these bulbar type of projections. And so here would be your superior colliculi that process visual information. Here's your inferior colliculi processing auditory information. And if we turn around, we can see that they're facing the rear of the brain. Okay, so they're on the posterior side of the midbrain. Let's rotate it all the way around. So this, if you really want to have a good understanding of anatomy, and this would be the pawn sitting down below, if you want to have a really good understanding of the anatomy and the locations of the things in the brain, this is a really good place to come and kind of play around. It might give you a little bit of different information about some of the functions. You need to know the functions that we're talking about, obviously, in the videos. It might add some, it might not include some that we're talking about, but it is kind of a fun place to play around and learn more about the anatomy of the brain.